Imagine a civilization, right, where the most profound truths, I mean, the laws governing society, the justification for wars, even the foundation of public morality, are decided purely because a leader stands up and says, I feel it to be true.
Wow. Yeah, that's
There's no empirical data provided, like zero verifiable proof offered. The entire societal structure rests on this internal, inaccessible black box of assertion.
it's a pretty terrifying prospect for anyone who, values transparency. But it's also a framework that has actually defined massive stretches of human history.
Mm.
I mean, the tension between verifiable proof and unshakable belief is, well, it's one of the absolute oldest fault lines in civilization.
Exactly. And that cuts straight to the core of what we're unpacking today for you, the listener, in this deep dive.
Right.
We are looking at a really thought-provoking stack of sources today. It centers around a blog post from the platform Knowledge is King.
Oh, yeah. Mark Wells.
Yes, written by Mark Wells on May 10th, 2026. The piece is titled The Great Divide, Why Logic Demands More Than. And Wells is, well, he's a writer clearly invested in the intersections of philosophy, history, theology, human behavior, all of it.
Totally. You can see that in his other works, too. I mean, titles like Islam's Golden Legacy and The Living Creed,
Yeah.
they really show he's a thinker trying to decode how we organize our thoughts and then, subsequently our societies.
Yeah, and the real hook of his argument today is his absolute refusal to engage in a typical theological debate.
Yes. That's what makes it so interesting.
Right. He totally bypasses the usual arguments over, like, the origins of the universe or whether ancient texts are valid. Instead, he focuses entirely on methodology.
Right. The machinery.
Exactly, the machinery we use to arrive at what we claim is true, regardless of the belief itself. Now, quick impartiality disclaimer for you guys listening. Our aim today is not to declare a winner in the age-old faith versus science debate.
No, not at all.
We are strictly putting the author's specific framework under the microscope, just to see how he builds his case for constructing objective collective truth. We aren't endorsing either viewpoint, we're just evaluating the architecture of his argument.
Yeah. And to get the ball rolling, let's look at the foundational mechanism Wells proposes. He calls logic the operating system of a clear mind.
Oh, I like that phrase. Operating system.
Yeah. And if we think about it like middle school math class, you remember that, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Well, the teacher didn't just care about the final answer. You had to show your work.
Ugh, yes. Show your work. The bane of my existence. But, I mean, it makes sense here. Premise A plus premise B equals conclusion C.
Exactly. The final answer is almost irrelevant compared to the interdependent steps you took to reach it. You don't just assert a theorem, you demonstrate the connective tissue. And for Wells, the validity lies entirely in the transparency of that connective tissue. An operating system processes inputs step by step in a way that can be audited. And he contrasts this heavily with what he sees as a faith-based methodology.
Which he says skips the premises entirely.
Right, it jumps straight to the conclusion. He actually refers to this using an engineering term, which I found fascinating. The black box.
Ah, yeah, the black box. In systems engineering, that's a device where you can observe the inputs and you can see the outputs, but the internal workings, like the actual process converting one into the other, are completely opaque. You can't see inside.
Exactly. Which means the truth being offered cannot be debugged or audited by the wider community.
So if someone hands me a conclusion and their entire methodological defense is, I just know it in my heart,
Right.
there is literally no common ground for us to debate. The internal conviction might be incredibly powerful for them, obviously, but from the outside, it acts as an absolute conversation stopper.
A conversation stopper is the exact danger he's highlighting here. If the steps taken to reach a profound truth can't be shown, then that truth can't be systematically verified.
Right.
And more importantly, it cannot be reliably taught. Relying on an untransferable feeling abandons the shared language of reason.
Which is a huge problem.
It is, because without a shared language to evaluate reality, a society kind of loses the ability to build a cohesive, objective understanding of the world.
Okay, so a conversation stopper at, say, a dinner party is one thing. It's an annoyance. But scaling that black box methodology up to the civilizational level, that is where the true friction lies.
Oh, absolutely.
Wells uses history as his laboratory for this, pointing specifically to the European Renaissance and the Enlightenment.
Yeah, as these major watershed moments.
Right, moments where humanity deliberately shifted its operating system.
The Enlightenment really represents a structural move away from scholasticism, which often relied on authoritative dogma. It moved toward rigorous empirical inquiry.
And he argues that modern legal foundations, human rights frameworks, all the scientific breakthroughs that doubled human life expectancy, those weren't constructed through intuitive leaps.
No, they require the grueling, tedious discipline of public proof. Wells insists that societies naturally drift toward stability only when they prioritize this shared, logical evidence over private revelation.
Okay, but wait. I have to push back on that historical premise a little bit.
Sure, let's hear it.
If we look at the broader timeline, haven't historically faithful societies operating almost entirely on that black box methodology, haven't they maintained incredible stability for centuries?
That's a fair point.
I mean, think about ancient pharaonic Egypt or the Byzantine Empire or various dynastic reigns. They functioned for generations without demanding empirical proof for their foundational beliefs.
Yeah. They didn't collapse overnight just because they lacked the scientific methods.
Exactly.
Wells actually anticipates this exact pushback. His rebuttal centers on the nature of that stability. He argues that we shouldn't confuse longevity with true resilience.
Okay, unpack that a bit. What's the difference there?
Well, when a society's operating system is built on unvetted emotional assertions, its stability is often just a facade. It's maintained by authoritarian force, not genuine consensus.
Ah, I see.
And that makes the population fundamentally vulnerable to sudden catastrophic manipulation by those in power, especially leaders driven by ego and pride.
So because the public isn't trained to demand proof, a leader can just assert something new and bypass critical thinking entirely.
Right. In a true black box society, a king could simply assert a new war or a tax and claim, it is divinely willed, and there's no mechanism to challenge it.
Because you can't audit the divine revelation.
Exactly. True logic, in Wells's framework, demands evidence. It requires the king to provide the exact same empirical proof as the peasant. That demand for shared evidence is what creates real stability.
Okay, but if we hold logic to that relentless standard of prove your starting point, don't we inevitably hit an epistemological brick wall?
Oh, the axiom problem.
Yes. This is the natural counterargument that always surfaces here. Logic cannot validate its own foundational axioms without stepping outside of itself. We have to assume certain unprovable things just to get the mechanism running at all. So, isn't logic just another form of faith at its root?
It's a great question, and Wells tackles this critique head on. He freely admits that any formal system, whether it's math or science, it has to begin with axioms.
Like 1 + 1 = 2?
Right. Statements assumed to be true to provide a starting point, but he draws a massive line between scientific axioms and blind faith.
Okay, let's ground this in a real-world analogy. It's like the assumption of the uniformity of nature, right? Every scientific endeavor operates on the axiom that the physical laws of the universe are going to behave tomorrow exactly as they behaved yesterday.
Exactly. Gravity won't suddenly repel objects on Tuesday.
Right. But we can't logically prove the future will resemble the past without using circular reasoning. We're basically saying it will happen because it has always happened. So we take a leap and we accept it as a foundational axiom.
But here is the crucial differentiator Wells points out. It's about how the assumption interacts with observable reality. A scientific axiom, like the uniformity of nature, invites relentless, continuous testing.
Right. Every time we drop an apple.
Every time. Or test a chemical reaction, or launch a satellite. We are actively testing that axiom. And consistently, reality responds exactly as expected. The physical world validates the assumption over and over again.
Oh, whereas blind faith, according to this framework, operates completely independently of physical observation.
Yes.
It's the difference between assuming the sun will rise tomorrow because of billions of years of consistent physical evidence versus asserting something that runs completely contrary to observed reality.
Exactly. The blind faith assertion maintains its position regardless of or even in spite of contradictory data. It forbids testing.
Right, because if you test it and it fails, the whole thing falls apart.
Which is why Wells proposes a very specific definition of true intellectual intelligence here.
What's his definition?
He says intellect isn't about knowing everything or having absolute certainty. It is the rigorous discipline of humility.
Wow, humility.
Yeah, it's the willingness to say, this is an axiom. It's an assumption we are holding conditionally until new evidence forces us to revise it.
Which highlights why the black box methodology really struggles with the concept of being wrong. If your entire worldview rests on, I just know, admitting that new evidence contradicts your feeling is structurally catastrophic.
The whole edifice crumbles.
But for logic, discovering an assumption is wrong isn't a collapse, it's just the necessary next step in the process. Okay, let's shift gears slightly.
Sure.
Because if we strip away the black box of faith to govern society, we are potentially left with a huge void where our moral compass used to be.
Ah, the character versus confession debate.
Right, if logic relies purely on verifiable physical reality, how does it handle abstract, deeply human concepts like morality? Does a purely logical society just lose its moral compass entirely?
This brings up the classic argument that faith is necessary to be a good person. And Wells explores this theme deeply in another essay on the site, The Living Creed, Why Your Character is Your Real Religion.
So what's his rebuttal?
He argues that character should be defined by actions, not internal confessions of belief. He uses this great phrase, the repeated practice of simple decency.
The repeated practice of simple decency. I love that.
Yeah, he posits that a logical code of conduct is actually a superior blueprint for society because it relies on demonstrable causality.
Like valuing evidence, honesty, and consistency.
Exactly. You behave honestly, not because an inexplicable force demands it, but because historical observation proves it's the optimal strategy for collective survival.
Oh, that makes sense. A person who acts with decency because it is logically sound to do so is fundamentally more reliable.
Much more reliable because their operating system is transparent. You can predict their behavior based on shared rules.
Right, whereas if someone is acting out of an inexplicable abstract belief,
You have no mechanism for predicting when or how that belief might shift. They could receive a new revelation tomorrow that justifies something terrible. But bound by logical necessity, their morality is anchored in the shared physical reality we all inhabit.
okay, so to wrap up this journey Wells has taken us on, his bottom line is pretty clear. Accepting things on faith might offer profound personal comfort, sure,
Yeah, it absolutely does for many.
but it simply cannot serve as a blueprint for collective truth.
And bringing this directly back to you, the listener navigating today's environment makes this incredibly relevant.
Oh, definitely. We are constantly swimming in an era overflowing with information, algorithmic echo chambers, competing narratives.
Right. In this landscape, your ability to defend your perspectives with reason isn't just some academic exercise. Wells argues it's the true mark of an intellectual mind. It requires checking our egos at the door and doing the grueling work of following the breadcrumbs of evidence.
Even when they lead somewhere uncomfortable, which honestly leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought to mull over today.
Let's hear it.
Well, if true logic requires us to check our egos at the door, how much of what we currently defend as our logical reasoning is actually just our ego and comfort in disguise?
Oh, wow.
Right. Are we genuinely following the evidence, or are we just looking for a way to justify a conclusion we've already jumped to inside our own little black boxes?
That is a very uncomfortable but very necessary question to ask ourselves.
Something to think about, for sure. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time.